All right. As my good friend Highland G says, that's us. We're live, ready to go. So, welcome back, everybody, to the panel as well. We got our third and final um, take on the last third of The Wonderful Strangers in Paradise by Terry Moore. And I'm gonna plug right away that we'll do some quick introductions, and then right after that, we're jumping into spoiler territory. I'm gonna read some stuff that's going to be leading right up to the final act, basically, to get us in as a recap. So if you haven't read it and you're really interested in checking it out for yourself, pause this and come back at some point. But yeah, just great to be here. And so let's just do a quick intro around the room for the Love Comics. You want to start us out?
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you, Highland G, for hosting us. Thank you, Freddie Femur's cousin Mo, for guiding us through the conversation as Texas and New Delhi here are just along for the ride. But it's great to be back, and I'm really looking forward to this culminating conversation of ours.
Yeah, great. Gore?
Well, it's good to be here. Good to see you guys. And I apologize for the volume, those of you who can't hear me. And I'm just here to support Freddie Fumer, a much misunderstood Texas attorney. And he gives a bad name to Texas lawyers, but they're all, but he's like Cyclops in the X-Men. I just don't understand his humanism. He's just trying to do the right thing, and it's not his fault women fall for him. It's not him. It's just part of giving something back to the community.
He's a chick magnet. He'll tell you that.
He is, and it's it's a blessing. It's a curse.
Yeah, great. And the one and only, the man hosting us all. Thank you, Highland G. Would you like to do a little intro for your viewers and the other ones out there?
So, I mean, my viewers should know who I am, so that's all good. I'm just happy to be here and finally kind of get everybody together after a few kind of hiccups getting scheduling things. And I'm looking forward to see how the discussion goes.
All right, good. Yeah, and yeah, thank you guys for delaying. I was the cause of some of the trouble and the misfit with the delay, but compatriots on the screen with me were so kind about wanting to make sure we did it when we were all enjoying it. And I was on a week of retreat, and I would have not been in any kind of mood to host it last week on Saturday. Like you guys all intuited and said, we'll give you an extra week to kind of get back to reality. So thank you for that. Yeah, I want to start with a section. So as I said, I'm going to spoil some stuff with this last third that we're going to talk about. This is going to be a section from Francine. There's some of these large pages where there were block text, but I found this is a great recap, and it takes us right up actually through a lot of what we're going to discuss right up until basically the final act, the last 100 pages or so of the story. And so Terry Moore writes, and this is in Francine's viewpoint. I asked Griffin once what it was like being famous. He said most people don't lead lives, they accept them. Sitting between the towering image of Katu's dream girl and the disappointment on Nikki's face, I saw myself clearly for the very first time. It was as if I had been sleepwalking all these years and the spell had been broken. My life flashed before my eyes. High school, Katu, the school play, the college scandal, Katu's return to my life, Freddie, David, our little rent house above the garage, Katu's Parker trouble, the night we almost had sex, the arguments, the fights, running away, the plane crashed, nursing David, the year at my mother's house, meeting Brad, being kidnapped, trying to get back with Katu and finding her with Casey, running back to Brad, our wedding day and saying goodbye to Katu for what I thought was the last time. All that awkwardness, the uncertainty, the indecision, the awful act of keeping Katu at arm's length for years while I enjoyed the attention, but not the price. I saw it all as if it had been written down and shown to me in a book. Then that night in the studio when we made up, or rather, she forgave me. I'd been a fool. If I died today and found myself facing God tonight, he'd look at me and say, I gave you all the chances at happiness. Why didn't you take them? And I'd have no answer. My reasons all looked like excuses now. I had forced the love of my life to live without me. Meanwhile, I was drifting through the lives of other people, alone, unhappy, losing the inner joy that once defined me, and I had no one to blame but myself. I'd been a fool. I stood up. I took my life back. And so I found that like as I was going through it, like we get that whole summation, and it's like for me, anyways, just that summation of like, wow, in these 2,000 pages, all the stuff that happened, right? The school play, the plane crash, David, all the ups and downs these characters go through. It just was one of those passages that resonated with me as like a great recap and this setting up for like these final 100 pages of this epic story that we've got. And so I guess what I'd like to start with is just maybe some just general impressions overall as to like where we're at right now, coming into this last third. One of the big things we left off with was this question around whether, I think we discussed it a little bit at the end of the last stream. Did Kachu actually sleep with Casey? And that's where we kind of starts the ball rolling, I guess, from this section. So, Gore, I'd be curious. I'll start with you.
First of all, that was a wonderful reading, Matthew. It was really nice, and it's actually rather emotional.
Yeah.
It's a very emotional piece, and you did just a wonderful reading of it. That reading there, it encapsulates not just Kachu, but it's the life of her, all those people around her. I mean, in Francine, all those people around her, and revisiting this book was actually quite moving for me, and in a way that because many years have passed, things have happened to all of us here, and very personal things. I'm sure. I know. I mean, from my end, and probably from your end. I know from some of you from your end. And for the love of comics, I thought about you last night because I had not revisited Day Tripper in almost 10 years. And I was thinking about it because of this book. And what Francine just said, I wrote down this passage from Day Tripper when I think it's either Bross or somebody it says this. He says, "Do you remember what I think of every time I look at her? I remember when we first met. I told her I wanted to be a writer and that I knew a great romance was waiting for me to write it. She smiled and said that she had hoped a great romance was waiting for me to live it. Life is made up of these moments. Some relationships are based on such moments, such choices, such actions. And that's the one moment I will carry with me after all the others fade, the one which makes all the others worthwhile." Yeah, that's the advice from the father to Bras. And I thought about this, that what you just read, and about these moments that these characters have had throughout this wonderful book, and of Strangers in Paradise. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but yeah, I was just I was moved again last night as I'm revisiting Day Tripper, and which I think is I think if you've read Strangers in Paradise, so you read Day Tripper, they complement each other in a really wonderful way. So
Yeah. What a beautiful connection, Gore. I haven't read Day Tripper in a long time either, but what just a beautiful tie in these threads together from both of them. And for the love of comics, I guess I'd like to go to you with. I know Day Tripper is one of your one of your favorite reads.
It is.
Yeah, and I mean, Day Tripper is also a comic that I've talked about a lot, and I've talked about it with people who have really enjoyed it and been blown away by it and found it to be life-changing, life-affirming, and all of those things that one may sort of expect. But I have, at the same time, also talked to people who find it manipulative or overrated or sentimental or, among other things. And so it's a book that I have not just read, but I have also had occasion to articulate my thoughts and feelings about, and in those processes of articulation, sort of struggle with and, hone and craft, like, what exactly do I mean, and was that really the reason I like that much, and doesn't this person making this argument have a point? So it's been not just a book that has been read but interrogated. And when I think about Strangers in Paradise, it's very much a work that invites interrogation because it's constantly interrogating itself. The characters question each other and they question themselves and they do things. And then when you, as a reader, have so many different reactions you could have, you find many of them mirrored in the story itself, sometimes by the very characters who enacted that. They have the same doubts that you did about themselves, to the point where you have, in the section that I think we read, this metafictional aspect of an editor responding to a manuscript which has a script which is the retelling of a story that we've been reading in comics form, which is the daughter of one of the characters, Francine's daughter, writing a story and then saying, well, this is so repetitive and it's the same thing over and over again. And they get together and they leave and they get together and they leave. And what's the significance? And shouldn't I have this? And then they talk about what a hollow criticism that is. And while they're talking about that, they also say that, well, she does have a point because that didn't actually happen and you're misremembering or you misheard the story and you said it. And so you have this level of constant examination that I think is what is going to remain with me the most from this work, is that it wasn't just interested in telling a story, but like so many of our favorite stories, like Day Tripper, like The 1001 Nights, like all of these books that we talk about over and over again, it was about storytelling. It was about stories as well, which can be so pretentious so easily, and it's the best literature, I think, that really pulls it off. And that's what I think this one does as well. In many ways, it's about the stories that we tell, the stories that we tell about ourselves and each other, and how we reconcile themselves to our lives and how we reconcile ourselves to our lives by making a story out of it. And then there are all these flash forwards and flashbacks and people recounting things to each other and people saying, do you remember when this happened? And not since that thing that has happened. And it really involves the reader in it because the reader is living these things with the characters. So I thought, among many, many other things, that was like the masterful thing that I'll always, I think, feel about this series.
Yeah, well said.
What's that?
Highland G, got some opening comments for you? Opening arguments?
Opening arguments. I mean, this is a reread for me, so like I know the overall kind of premise. There's things that I'd forgotten, as you know, you always kind of do these things. So it's nice to kind of re-go over things that you didn't pick up on. One like this time round, what that I completely forgot about was Casey's kind of like arc, especially towards the end as things kind of get revealed. But what I had clicked to was, I forget exactly when it was, but earlier on, there was a guy who attacked someone at her gym. And then, like, I forget if it was her or one of the other trainers, like, end up also potentially getting attacked, but they took this guy out. And I remember at that point in time being like, a personal trainer doesn't necessarily mean a martial artist. You know, like there's something else going on there, but like I just kind of put it to the side and then didn't think about it until like much later on. I was like, hang on a minute. Like they always talk about like how flexible she is, and like I'm like, there's something else kind of going on with this like kind of character. So I think what I really got a positive out of this time round was focusing on some of the side characters a bit more, like Casey, Tambi, really like allowing myself to get more kind of emotionally kind of into her character and how like she does want to connect with people, but connect with people on like her terms, and like she is trying. So no matter how many times Kachu might go off or not at how she went about doing something, or you know, whatever the case may be, like she genuinely does care, the lengths that she goes to try and like, you know, save David, you know, several times and paying all the fees, no questions asked. You know, like there's elements there, although there might be what does it say, like selfish reasons as well as to why she wants to keep him around. Like there's extents, you know, that she does care about people and puts those kind of efforts in. So yeah, so like lots of that kind of stuff with the like picking up like the side characters and stuff. Like one thing I really thought about is like this is very much sold as a sort of like Kachu Francine story, but like if you really think about it, the story start to finish is David's story because he's the only character that you get his origin all the way to his end.
Yeah.
So like the whole book is David's story if you think about it in a way.
Yeah, it's. I'll pick up a little bit on that. So, like when we step back, like I had the same thing to a certain extent. This idea of connecting with some of these other characters and seeing the role that they played. Because the first time through, I was so just in love with Kachu and Francine and what was going on. And where we kind of picked up here was this idea of like, did Kachu actually sleep with Casey? And then just for some, if for people who have read it, so Brad shows back up and Francine returns to him. And then, as you mentioned, Highland G, one of the things I wrote was Casey becomes quote unquote the reason. Like she becomes the reasonable one, this kind of far out there, ditzy, you know, boob job gymnastics type woman. All of a sudden becomes like she's the one that tells Kachu, you need to go back and learn how to paint, or you need to go back to your painting. And throughout this last third, Casey really becomes that friend that you meet in a little bit later in life after high school, but becomes a lifelong friend that you can really depend on and is always there, is always has the heart. And so, yeah, I found that really interesting that like Casey's role really changed a little bit. And we can get into this a little bit later on, but David is really, you know, the North Star for the whole group. He's really the what they're all kind of aiming for of how they want to treat each other. And David's kind of the embodiment of it. It doesn't mean he doesn't make mistakes along the way, but he really has that moral sense of being the North Star. And I know, Gore, you've talked a lot about David, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this last part with him in it.
Yes, David, and really was a big surprise to me throughout this book, reading this the first time and the second time. How he, towards the end of the book, I like how you phrased it, the North Star, and his origin story in the comic is told after the wedding, after Francine's wedding, but in the trade, it's put at like almost like an epilogue in the book. With it interesting why Terry Moore decided to do that. And so in the comic, we learn about its origin, how we realize that David is this man, he's living the life of somebody else that he basically killed. And he takes on his life. It's almost like he died when he was, 15, 17 years old, how old he was when he killed this man. And he took the name of David. And I don't know if, I don't think Moore intended this, but if you notice that when he has Freddie read his will, right?
Yeah.
He has, of all the people, Freddie is reading his will. And you have four characters. You have Casey, Kachu, Francine, and Tambi. And he's reading his will, his testament. And he's pointing out certain things. Now they all know him pretty well. Three of them know him intimately. Francine's the only one that does not, but it's inconsequential because she knows his character. But it's almost like the four Gospels, the Bible, because David does become like a Christ figure throughout this. The way he conducts himself, and the way he points out things, and the way he doesn't really judge in the end, except those who do.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, these four, like four apostles, are going to go out into the world, and in a way, are better people because of David. I mean, David is reborn. You could speak, metaphorically. He's divided, but now he's whole. And in a way, he's been quote unquote preaching the gospel without actually preaching. our common humanity throughout this. And it really struck me in the second reading. Again, I don't think Moore intended this. This is entirely my thing. And but I was just incredibly moved. And regarding Francine, how you pointed out, and is that she finally sees the painting, a painting she detested, but the painting is owned by her husband's brother, who has been killed, a musician whose music she's been listening throughout the series, and the music deeply moves her. But then she finds out that that painting was not something erotic for the singer. It was a muse. It was an inspiration. He saw the beauty in it. Some stranger, what Kachu has seen the entire time, and now it strikes Francine. Oh my God! It's like it's a profound epiphany that she has at that moment, and what that painting meant, what Francine, I mean, what Kachu has seen in her, what Silver sees in her, and it's almost like an embrace, a beautiful embrace. Um, but David's effect, David, I just wanted to mention that is that it's just actually, I don't know, it just you're right. He becomes, it's like a trinity of characters of these three, Kachu, Francine, and David.
Yeah. And I think you said it really well. This idea of like, David's not the, if he's the Christ figure, he's not the Old Testament Christ that demands a transactional, I love you if, and instead he's just in the embodiment of loving them, all their flaws, everything they are. It's kind of that just wholesome. It's not transactional. It's love that's just love because he actually loves them, and that's such a beautiful way to think about it. Or, for the love of comics. Some comments. Oh, I think your mic's off, buddy.
Sorry about that. I really like that reading Gore. I obviously did not think about it that way, but getting to what Highland G was saying in some ways, that if it's David's story and you have him, and also bookending it in that way, but him having the gospel that these characters then go forward with their lives, that's the transaction. It's not a monetary transaction. That's the exchange. That's what they get from each other, and that love. To me, what's interesting is how this story gets there, because it starts by seeming like a romantic comedy or a slice of life sort of thing, and then you get these little thriller, crime noir elements in it, and it's real soap operatic, and then you're just like, oh, we've been in love, etc. And then by the time you're ending it 2,000 plus pages later, you're like, here's this sort of discussion about what our role is in the universe and how do souls touch each other and things like that, and without it ever seeming out of place. It's so well grown from within the story of these characters. I'm trying to think of some series that I've read that has gone through so many different identities, so to speak, while still remaining one cohesive whole. I think Love and Rockets is the only thing that comes even close to it, by having all of those identities sort of nestle within the same set of characters or the same world or the same universe. I mean, there are times in this where you're just like, surely this is nonsensical, and then it's brought back. And even things, Highland G, I think what you were pointing out, it comes up all the time, and I think this is that metafictional aspect also that I was touching upon earlier, where you'll get to some part and you'll be like, this doesn't make any sense, or that's just such a coincidence, isn't it? And then like 150 pages later, you're like, yeah, because it isn't a coincidence, and this is the reason why it's not. And you're just like, that's incredible. That's incredible story writing, because you're sort of commenting on it. You're giving the reader pulp and you're giving the reader soap opera, and at the same time you're saying, but it's not illogical in the way that pulp or soap opera might necessarily need to be to entertain. So it's really eating its cake and having it too in that way. And that kind of storytelling, I think, leading you to these kind of endings, these very very, spiritual sort of things, commentary about life coming from this comedy of who's sleeping with whom and who's going to hook up with whom. To me is incredible. I think it's a significant achievement because everything, and there are things that I can find to be, oh, that's not that great. It kind of has a reason for it, and it has an excuse for it, and it has an exit. Whether I'm going to give it that exit 100% or not is a different matter. It's like it's there, and I have to admire the way that it's there, or that it's there that consistently.
I also think it's quite funny, like how much you can get in one scene as things kind of progress, because like to begin with, you are getting like an arc of like the love story, or an arc of the lawyer, story, or an arc of the espionage or whatever it is, and they're kind of focusing in areas. But like as we get towards the end, there was like a section where, like, I think Kachu and David had woke up that they'd got married in Vegas. David tells Kachu that he's slept with Tambi. Kachu calls Tambi. We see Tambi in a war scene, and then she throws a phone, shoots it. We get a comedy moment, and then it cuts back to like Kachu having to split between. I think she kind of figures out, or they then learn about what's kind of going on with David. So she's like angry with him, frustrated, but at the same time feeling sorry for him and trying to care for him. And all this is happening in a matter of like, I don't know, 20 pages or so. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah. And it's interesting too. Like, we've got these, one of the things I really like, it's one of the things that I've talked often about, this is one of my two favorite series of all time, along with Black Science by Remender. And in both cases, I think what really draws me in is that the characters are good and evil. They embody all of humanity. Each one does. So like I think of Black Science, like at some point, each character is the villain and each character is the hero. And in this one, what Terry Moore does, like this, we've got Casey, who we just talked about as being like the reason. She's been like helping Kachu, like, okay, you need to let Francine go. You need to start painting again. I'm going to kind of like trying to ground things. And then we find out that Francine loses her baby, which was expertly done the way that he wrote that with having the clock. I love that whole part. And Francine ends up calling Kachu and leaving a voicemail, not explaining the whole thing. And Casey gets it and deletes it, thinking she's helping Kachu. And then there's this whole, like, oh my God, like Francine's going through this alone. Casey thought she was doing well, when really what Francine needed was Kachu's friendship at that point. And so you can kind of see these characters with that dynamic, that identity of like, yeah, at one point I'm doing wholesome, skillful acts, and then I mean well, and I'm causing harm in the other one. And we get each character that does that throughout. And it's just, it's part of being human, right? Yeah, Gore. Thoughts?
Certainly the development of these characters. I mean, I think it was Damien who pointed it out in one of the early streams of categorizing this book in any kind of genre. I don't know how to do that. Yeah. I think, you walk into a bookstore now, you have all these different genres. And let's say you're a bookseller. Okay, here's Strangers in Paradise. Where would you put this? Okay, romance. Well, it's not exactly a romance. Okay. A thriller. Well, it has that, but it's not exactly a thriller. Superhero genre. Well, it does have some stuff like it, but it's not exactly that. Where do we put this book? It's definitely a series that defies the genre. And like I, for the love of comics, pointed out, it starts out like some kind of comedy. Some kind of like, I think you had said that it was like an Archie comic in a way, And it certainly develops into everything you have said, the soap opera, the thriller, all these kinds of things. But you do see, I mean, for example, you guys talk about Casey. Casey was a huge surprise to me as well. I didn't see it coming that she was basically a Parker girl. Mm-hmm. And when the will was being read, the way Terry Moore drew her, she didn't have all the makeup. Her hair isn't all made up. I mean, she's in grief because of David. She loved David. And they're all four sitting there. and they have these expressions. I mean, Kachu is angry, Tambi, and there's Casey, and there's Francine, and then Freddie reads the will. He almost like punches Pilate in a way, reading the thing. And so, and he reads the will, and he basically, David has a letter for each one of them that he wants read out. And Casey is outed, that she's a Parker girl. But he defends her, like you said. She was there for a reason. And she was there actually to protect you, Kachu. And that's exactly what she did. She may have saved your life at least one time. And the development of the characters is extremely rich. I mean, you can basically, when you think of the characters, you think actually you know them pretty well. That's how fleshed out they are. The supporting characters, obviously the main characters, and how he was able to do this by himself, because I think he does everything on this book, the lettering, everything. And like Highland G pointed out, things that come out, you're thinking, okay, why is that there? And then 100 pages later, that's why that's there. I mean, the purpose and the intent in this book is just brilliant, and it is like Love and Rockets. That's the only thing I myself can compare it to, and of how this book has been going on for over 30 years. I guess almost 40 years now. It's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah. For the love of comics, and you are muted right now.
I was just I was just hopping from place to place, but especially talking about how Terry Moore's doing everything, including the lettering, and it's like how much difference the lettering makes. This is one of those comics in which it's not just the selection of the style, but also the boxes and also the placement of it. I mean, there are scenes in which, I mean, I wasn't conscious of it then, but then I noticed that there'll be someone who's speaking in ovals and someone else who's speaking in rectangles. And it's not just to distinguish when the dialogue's going back and forth, because it doesn't happen all the time, but it's when, oh, this one's trying to break up with that one, and this one is being warm, and this one is being cold. These kind of things, I think, are little technical things that are almost supposed to be invisible, but they have the effect that they need to have. So again, the craftsmanship involved in this series in setting these characters on these journeys, and then being able to, most people say things like stick the landing, but it's just throughout, it's consistent, and it's constantly giving you new information. And I think that's another commentary on this repetition. Is like, okay, it's repetitive in only the most facile manner. Every time you get to a similar situation, it's actually different, and you're getting more information. And the other thing that was pointed out about how much is packed into these scenes, I also really appreciated the craft of going back to scenes that we have seen before, but giving them to us from another angle, and then showing us what another character was doing, and then bringing two scenes that we have seen before and bringing them together from a third angle. I mean, it is the sort of thing that people do in sci-fi movies about time travel, and this is someone doing it in a romance and in a love story and in a slice of life thing. So the techniques involved over here are superhero comics techniques, and mouse techniques, and Joe Sacco's Palestine techniques. There's all of this stuff as far as comics vocabulary is concerned, that's being thrown in over there. Lettering being just one of the more obvious sort of examples of it. It's just fantastic.
Yeah. G. I
do have one bit on the kind of, not on the lettering as such, but like the prose and mixed media sort of like elements of things. I had a bit of a split reaction to, where if there was the songs, or there was a long conversation where they'd have like, a couple of pictures of the panel of like, this is the two people that are talking kind of thing, and then you'd have like the whole thing of prose. I didn't mind that so much, but it did feel to me personally towards the end, we were kind of speeding through certain things, and some things that could have been drawn were instead a full page of script. And there wasn't art next to it or anything, and it kind of felt almost like they ran out of time to do something, you know, because obviously if he is doing everything, he'd have to draw that and ink it and, letter it and so on and so forth. So maybe it is quicker in some ways just to put the script in for things that he doesn't feel needs the same level of attention. But I did appreciate when the extra effort was put into those pages, like Angstrom was saying, with like referencing back to old things. I distinctly remember, I can't remember what the exact kind of conversation was, but one of the characters was explaining something, and on the right of the page you were getting their explanation, but as they were explaining it, you had like 4 or 5 panels that took place like throughout the whole book of like what happened to, say, like David. And you could emotionally feel what that person was saying as they were making those references, because you had those 4 little kind of pictures there, and it just made such a difference, to those sort of prosy sections of the kind of book. So as I say, it's a split thing for me, because when it was done well, it was perfect, but sometimes for me it just felt a little bit that you'd run out of time.
Yeah, it felt like, I think, for me at times, like this could have been another 50 issues. Like if you would have taken all that prose and actually turned them into arcs and comics, like this could have been another 50 issues on top of what he did.
And that's where, as I said, the middle ground really worked well, if that had been done a little bit better in some of the other sections.
And I just wonder too, just thinking about like Terry Moore, like we watch him do, there's a section in this last part where he draws it almost as peanuts, right? I think it's with Freddy. He's got like this peanut cartoon style. He's got all these different styles throughout. He's mixing these different medias. He's adding songs in. And maybe it was like he had the time to do these other issues. He had the time to make this longer, and he decided he wanted to do a little more prose and just try his hand at some more prose. Maybe that was part of it. But I'm like, just his willingness to try anything and to try to figure out kind of what worked and how to get the story out there. Yeah, I agree. At times there were times where I was like, man, that's a lot of text. Like I really want to get back to some pictures and stuff like that.
But I think there is that sort of element, I guess, that you take into account once you kind of understand that this is his first main solo work from like nothing, like he was doing like shorts cartoons in like magazines or newspapers and stuff before that. He wasn't writing full-length comic issues, so to go to full-length comic issues and then write X amount of long run, like you've got to keep yourself, entertained. He's got to figure out what he wants to do. He's not working for a big company, so he's kind of doing his own thing and finding his own kind of ground within that. And this does feel experimental in a way, like some of the things that he's kind of done. Because I've read pretty much everything else of his apart from Echo, and that includes the kind of expansions to Strangers in Paradise. And like they feel a little bit more
refined.
Yeah, just a little bit. Like it's still got the same wackiness. It'll still jump to the sort of Archie style sometimes. It'll do little. You'll even have some books where it kind of crosses over, where you'll have like normal art with like sort of more cartoony art things going on in the background. Like Motor Girl, for instance, has things that are like PTSD related. So you've got like 2 art styles kind of layering over each other in a way. And like there's lots of cool stuff that he does in different books, but Strangers is definitely the one that he done the most prose in. But I think it's because it was his first thing, and it's probably one of the most ambitious things that he's done as well. Because the only other run that he's done that's even close to being as long as this is Rachel Rising, and I do enjoy that as well.
And just I'll kind of get us caught up on the story, and then I'll come back over to you, Gore. So we get to this point where after Francine still had thought Kachu and Casey had cheated on her, she goes back to Brad. They go to get married. Kachu finds out, goes to the wedding. That doesn't turn out well. And then we actually jump a year ahead, where Kachu's in there with her therapist talking about all the crap that she's dealt with in her life. And we also at the same time then get to Kachu's gallery opening, right? And she gets her first like big show. She calls back to the agent. There's some really cool scenes in there where Freddy, she wants to make friends with Freddy at one point, which I really enjoyed. And he's like, well, what's your game, woman? What's going on here? And there's one image. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just quickly there, between the wedding and the waking up a year later, that's where you get David's story in the trades. Just as a point of reference.
And one of the panels I remember the most is this one here. I'm trying to get where Freddie's looking at the picture in the gallery and he says something like, "Those are the biggest boobs I've ever seen." And it just, for whatever reason, that always stuck with me because each time I came across it now, and this is my second read through, I just laugh at it. Like it rings in my head. I'm like, Freddie just in awe of how big Francine's boobs are on these enormous giant sized paintings. But and one of the other things I'll bring in, so we've got that to discuss, and I would also like to just mention, so we talk about how these, what we thought were side characters, are instrumental. David starts out as a side character. Tamby starts out as a side character. Casey does. Freddie's a little bit less integral, but he's still there. But then the side characters really become things like Griffin and his girlfriend Nikki, and Marie Midnight, Francine's mom, and Francine's dad, even a little bit on the boat and stuff like that.
The different people who work in Couture Studios.
Yeah, Pia. So we get these the gentleman who works there. Yeah, so we get like it broadens out where what we thought were side characters become central to the story, and new kind of side characters come in and play a significant role in what happens.
Or even the cop that went undercover as a model.
Yeah, Noel or whatever, right? Something along that lines. But yeah, Gore, I'd be curious to hear some thoughts from you on this.
Yeah, that painting you showed, that's the one that Silver bought.
Yes.
The rock star.
Yeah.
And I think also Francine's been listening to his music, and in a way, she was like a muse to him, writing these very moving songs. Now, Freddie just sees it as something he could, I think Couture made a joke about he could hump on. And, that's what Freddie sees. But like you alluded to regarding the characters, they all become better people by the end. I mean, Francine's mom, at first when you meet her, I mean, she does not like Couture, does not like what she represents, like anything about her. She's ashamed of her own past. But by the end of the series, she embraces Couture, accepts that her daughter is going to be in a relationship with Couture. Her Midnight persona from the past, she embraces that. She starts to take care of her health. And she's going forward. Francine's father, they reconciles with his wife. Even Freddie at the end, when he has that final meeting with Casey, he at first was thinking he's going to say something stupid, and he doesn't. And as I'm reading, I'm thinking, okay, what's he going to do? What's he going to do? Not at all. In the end, he says, "Well, maybe I can ask you out again sometime." And she smiles. And he says, "I like this Casey. I like the real you."
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. And these side characters, by the end, when we meet them as a reader, we have some negative views about them. That's how they're portrayed. But they definitely evolve. And by the end, I don't have any negative views about these people. I mean, they're extremely well-rounded. And again, how Moore did this was just absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. And I think one thing, Gore, that resonates with me as you're talking about this is that, like, Francine's mom, Marie, how she comes to love Couture. It's not only the character development of Marie, but it's also showing something about Couture as well. It's a reflection of kind of who she is, but seeing through Marie's acceptance of her. And it's just a really interesting way to make you invest in the characters even more. So, yeah. For the love of comics.
No, I think those are all like I'm still sort of soaking the different parts of the story in. I think what really stood out to me at one point of time, not towards the end, but a little before that, were these alternate realities that could be, and the kind of confusion that they create in the reader momentarily before you realize what's going on, because the authenticity of their presentation is so potent, where it could be like, even if it's a flight of fancy, even if it's imagination, even if it's a dream, just before it breaks, it's so real that you as a reader have the sense of confusion. It's a good confusion because it adds to this texture that you get this story and you get these lives, but you also get these parallel lives or these alternate lives. You get these other things that could have been or that might have been. And so then when people talk about these things, once again, thanks to the power of comics, we as the reader have experienced these things quite viscerally, just, almost as much as we've experienced what is real, what is quote unquote real. And I think that was another one of those marvelous things that the book did, that momentarily confused me, but never took me out of the story, but seemed to make the story richer once I'd gone on with it a little bit, which is what I felt about a lot of the stories, that I'm being surprised, I've got a question in my head, and then a few pages or a few chapters or a few dozen or 100 pages later, it makes sense and it comes in as part of the narrative intent in a way that was very impressive. Having said that, though, I think I will agree with G on the fact that while I appreciated the prose parts of it, and there were a lot of them that I thought I'd skip, and then I read a little bit, and I was like, well, this seems to have important information. It's not just something that has happened. It's like part of the story, and it's like an important part of the plot, or it's revealing something that I'm not going to get somewhere else. So I should read it. I sometimes, I think, would have far preferred them to be extended into comics form. There was just something about the brain switching back and forth in those, and especially seeing how good the comic is. I don't mind if it's pencil shaded. I don't mind if it looks sketchy or like as if it's roughs on paper. All of that stuff is part of the fun of that, playing with the comics form. And even the parts where it was almost like a screenplay, I'm okay with it because you could read it very fast, but you also only got dialogue. And over there, it had that additional aspect of me wondering, Terry Moore can write it like a screenplay because he knows what the body language is going to be and he knows what the composition will be. So he could possibly just write it like a script. If you're trying to write a comic yourself, you would probably put a lot more detail into that than just that dialogue A, character B. It's like a play almost when you read it. Those pages I was all right with. They worked well with the comics thing. They created something in my brain. But I think some of the larger, chunkier blocks of prose, as well written as they were, and as well as they approximated, like, a detective novel or a police report or what have you, I think I felt the same way, as Hyde G did. Is that I would have probably liked 50 issues more. And that would have been fine with me. I mean, we would have just had a part 4 to this series of live streams.
But as I said, sometimes he did find a nice middle ground where, like, I understand that if there's just like a conversation of a detective and someone being interviewed in a room, you don't want to have to draw that 2,000 times, in order to draw out a conversation. Like, I get that, but I liked when they still done at least part of it. So maybe they done like the intro to the conversation as a comic and then finished the conversation as script. Or you had like the sort of like script down the right side, and you had a couple of like comic reference page sort of images on the left of what they were talking about, if they're referring to something in the past or something like that. Those pages like just worked better for me because there was something visual to kind of keep going. Like, as you said, it can be a little bit jarring, especially for me who doesn't read prose, to jump into a full page of prose because my brain just kind of goes, okay, wait a minute, who's saying what? Whereas like when I see his comic, it's blatant most of the time who it is. Obviously occasionally someone's not going to look absolutely perfect, but yeah, as I say, I think there's a middle ground where some of it just works really, really well. Like, I don't have a specific page that I could kind of pull up that I can kind of think of off the top of my head. Mine are all digital anyway, but I just remember a few where, as I kind of said, you had down one side somebody describing something, and then you had like 4 or 5 reference sort of like shots of previous panels, which might even just been scans of the previous panels that you put on that page, but it worked and it added something to it.
Yeah, it felt like, at least from my sense, is like the the last third, this last third that we're reviewing, had more prose than either of the other two. It felt like it was a little more prose heavy compared to the whole first third. We got a little bit with the Detective Wallace stuff going on in the first third with the prose, but it was a little more balanced. Where this one felt like there was just a little bit more than
there was the one arc as well that was like almost all prose that I kind of remember. There was there's a character called it's called Molly and Pooh was the arc, but it was about a woman who ends up like killing her husband or something like that. But like the first section of it is all prose. The second section is comic, and the third section goes back to being like 90% prose.
Yeah.
And there's a few bits of mixed media kind of put in there as well. But to be honest, I was left partly confused as to why I needed this much information on this person who didn't really become that relevant to the greater story. But also just the sheer level of prose in the middle of like what was going on.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. I mean, I'm always gonna point out if there is prose in something because it is something that I'm not used to kind of reading, but I do also appreciate when it's put in a way that does flow well. So as Angstrom was saying, if it's done as a script, it flows a little bit easier on the eye than if it's a whole paragraph. And if you had that script with images, even if it was just 4 pictures and you have a top to bottom script, it just adds a bit kind of more. So, but as I said, I think he was trial and erroring a lot with this run. So, that becomes a bit more refined in other books that he kind of does, because his typical books are only like 5 or 6 issues.
Yeah.
It's also the question of the ambition of what he wants to talk about. Like, I mean, there's a prose piece that I found over here, which is about FBI agent Sarah Bryan and her tracing all of these Parker girls, and then you get this incredible amount of history and this revelation after revelation of where she had found who and what they'd been doing, etc. And there's just no way I can think of it being in the comic otherwise, because you'd need to have an exposition dump, and you'd wonder why you're going off on so many pages of some investigations that have taken place over the years. But in that quick prose summary as it is, it enriches the story, and it's only a couple of pages, and it's tight enough and it's formatted in a way enough. But I can see that as being a very good use of prose and very judicious use of it, where that's the best thing to do at that point of time. But then there are those other ones where, again, they're all rich and they're all very well written. I was quite happy about the fact that all of the prose was well written. I've read some prose in which comics writers try to write, extracts of a novel and stuff like that. And while they have an intention, it's not always, like here they're writing an award-winning novel, and it's like, yeah, but it doesn't sound like an award-winning novel. But over here, I think Terry Moore is very good as a prose writer. He's able to get the cadence and the stylizations of whichever context he wants to have in his prose sections. And I think that definitely helps even a resistant reader to get into it.
Yeah, I found a page here as well. Like, it's not exactly the example that I was kind of thinking about, but it gives you the kind of idea where you've got kind of script down the sides, and then you've got like 2 big kind of panels. So you kind of get that these are the 2 people talking. You don't need to see them drawn 40 times for each kind of box, but he gets to give you the information a bit quicker than drawing 10 pages. So like I guess what I'm saying is I like it when I don't realize I'm reading prose.
Yeah.
Like the better that they kind of like mask it, then the happier I am.
Well, and I want to come back then to what he just walked up, but before the Love of Comics I was talking about with Agent Sarah. So that's where we've talked about, like, that stuff that played out in Miami earlier on then becomes a key part, right? Because we find out Agent Sarah finds some clues and is able to piece some things together and to go undercover. And this really brings Tambi into the group in a different way, because Tambi is now willing to turn herself in to help save Kachu. And I think my endearment for Tambi then kind of started to turn a little bit as this, and she turns into Parker Girl stuff, I should say, right? And then takes a job with the government, stuff like that. But you can see like, oh, Tambi's not just a badass. She's not just, there's more to her than we know. And more starts to bring that around. And I thought that was really interesting because Tambi then becomes there's the stuff between Casey and Tambi at the end where you know that part. And Gore, yeah, I wanted to come to you to talk about that too. Just the love you can feel. You know, you've got this hard exterior of Tambi, and you got Casey who's just giggly and loving, and there's a relationship buddy in there.
Yeah, you have the tiger and the lamb, you know,
Yeah.
the William Blake point. And you see the scars that Tambi has in her hand. And Casey asks her, where'd you get all those from? You know, working for Darcy Parker. And there's that scene when they meet with Kachu and Francine.
Yep.
And then Kachu and Francine are looking at each other because there's like flirtation going on between Tambi and Casey.
Yeah.
And they're like, what? And they're calling each other these cute names. And they can't believe this. This absolutely can't believe this. Again, it goes back to how these characters, the way we perceive them at the beginning of this series, completely alters by the end. And you really do like them. I mean, and I'm not one of those readers that has to like the characters. I have to find the characters interesting. And what Moore has done, he's been able to make characters which at first seemed either uninteresting. At first, when we meet Casey at first, like you described, she's just a cheerleader. You know, everything is fake about her, quote unquote, fake about her. Even her expression seemed, you know, fake and everything. But by the end, no, not at all. I mean, there's an interior to her, a very rich interior. And with Tambi, she's just not some bodyguard assassin. She's much more than that. There's actually a heart that bleeds inside Tambi. And now it's bleeding for Casey. And Casey is now apparently maybe in love with her. I don't know. So it's just wonderful what he did, how he did this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked, again, picking up on the kind of side characters more this time around. I really liked the almost kind of mirror image going on between those two characters, because you've got Tambi, who's this big, butch, intimidating kind of woman who's got the self, you know, harm scars and what have you kind of going on, and visually she looks damaged, she looks angry, she looks, you know, unappealing to people in a way, right? Yet she wants love, she wants affection, she wants connections. You know, she just doesn't know maybe how to go about those things, and her looking this way and acting this way pushes people away from her. But interestingly, when you look at Casey's whole thing has been, you know, I'm happy-go-lucky, I smile at everything, I say yes to everybody, I'm happy all the time, nothing's ever wrong, you know. But then that stops her from connecting with anyone, because she's not showing any of her scars. She didn't let anybody know that she couldn't have children. She didn't let people know about her past or difficulties that she's kind of had. She's just always dealt with their lives and you know, being a yes man kind of thing, and that stopped her connecting with anyone. So the fact that her and Tambi can be honest with each other is where I think they found their connection, you know, because they're the only two that can to each other in a way.
Yeah, and that part with that you mentioned, Highland G, where Casey's all of, and what Gore said too. We think of these characters as one way, or we perceive them as one way. Casey is this, and then we get those scenes between her and Pia, where Pia's anorexic, and Casey's like, "Oh, you don't know what kind of damage this can do. This is how it affected me in my life." And again, there's Casey's just another layer unfolds of who Casey is, and there's the care and the idea that she can't have children, and yeah, I thought that was really powerful. I know, Gore, looked like you had something.
No. I'm glad you highlighted that with Pia, and how she basically lays everything out for this girl, you know, who's basically anorexic, and she's going to kill herself, and she says, "Look at me, you know, I went through this."
Yeah.
And you have this. The way she lays herself out this way, and it's just another revelation about Casey. And you're right, she's just a kind person, like Hyde and Jesus. She's positive throughout. She rarely ever sees anything negative, but obviously she's holding stuff inside. And but she's a positive force throughout this, throughout all the characters. They see that in her. Even when people hurt her, she still loves you. She still is going to be there for you, no matter what. And that's why it was so moving the way, and again the way Terry drew her up into the scene when the will is read. You see her very different. The way he draws her and her composure is very different. She's not the happy-go-lucky person there. She's in grief over David, and then it's revealed who she is, and she thinks it's going to ostracize her from Kachu and maybe the others, and but that doesn't happen.
What's interesting just before that is that the moment that she's kind of like with David, and they kind of sleep together and they're there the next morning kind of thing, before she finds out what's kind of going on with him. The two of them, because they are so giving people, just both get like a brief moment of peace.
Yeah. And that care comes out too when those two, after they sleep together, they're like, you know what? We got to get Kachu and Francine in the same room. We need to get them, and they lock them into the studio, right? And we need to get them talking again. We need to get that, and it's just this again. These, like you said, the care for this friend group that had developed that they've got, and all this happens before I think anybody knows what's going on really with David, and that's a huge part of this last third of the chunk is, David's dying. And
because Tamby's only just figuring it out at this point, I think.
Yeah, and it was when that whole scene is so emotional. Like I had tears in my eyes reading it, and I've been through it once before, and still it was like tears were coming down. It was like, all right, I need to stop at this point. Like it was the end of the issue, and it was like too much emotional stuff right now. This is a great spot to stop. But yeah, since it was Angstrom's first time through it, you want to talk a little bit about your reactions or non-reactions, or what you felt with like this whole progress of David dealing with this, and then the actual passing away. Like they find him in Kachu's or in Casey's bathroom, unconscious. They try to save his life. They take him to the hospital, and then Kachu's sitting there with him and gets the news like he's gone.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, well, there'd been the thing that we talked about in our previous live stream with the plane crash, where I'd sort of emotionally gone through that thing, where I thought David was dead.
Yeah.
And then it was a lot more of him in the story. And then it almost was a very unique sense of transportation into a story. Of course, I've been emotionally affected by stuff that's happened in fiction many, many times in my life. But it was also like, well, I had this false alarm before, and I felt these emotions, and now we've got this, and I was in the same state of shock as one of the characters receiving the news in many ways. Like it's not quite processing, or surely it's, he was wrong before, it's going to be wrong now, or you must have made a mistake. And having unfortunately been through something like that in real life, that's a pretty potent, real sort of emotion. So to feel it for a fictional character in a fictional story where you have been talking about how manipulatively soap operatic the story is, or what kind of cartoonish aspects are there throughout. I thought it was a fantastic experience. It was quite a job of empathy evoking that the author was able to get out of me at very complex sort of levels, because of not just the character of David, but the way that David's story had been given to us, and the way that David's and then you continue at the absolute end of it, you go back even further in time and you get more information, and you continue to get information about David in a way that I found to be very interesting. Up to the point where the last thing, at least in the editions that I have, the last thing is to be continued in issue number 1 is how it ends. Because you go completely all the way back to the museum and all the way back to their first meeting. So I found that to be a sort of salve as well, in a way that it just cycles back, and you can just start reading the book again, and he'll be alive.
Yeah, there's
And if you
one of
could,
the. I was going to mention. Yeah, go ahead, ING. Go ahead, buddy.
I was going to say that the pages that lead out of David's story are not exactly the same as the pages that start the book. It is kind of like David's perspective, if you like.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice that it's more of a throwback to that first issue than just a copy paste.
Yeah, I was going to mention I think one of the things that felt somewhat impactful about this is during this time, Francine's not in the story. There's large chunks throughout this last third, where one of the characters really kind of is kind of just gone for large chunks of it, or shows up in just a one page out of the 20 issues or a panel. And so yeah, there's parts where I thought that was really really impactful for me. There's also a scene too, which I love, that before David dies, where Tambi carries him off. Something happens, and Tambi's got David in his arms, and it's just this really sweet, impactful scene. And again, it's like shedding this different light on who we think Tambi is as a person.
I think he collapsed on the sofa or something, and she puts him to bed, and then he wakes up thinking that Casey's made him breakfast, but actually it's Tambi still stayed there through the night to make sure it's the morning.
Yeah, there's Gore shows it there. Yeah, it's just another one of those things where beautiful artwork, and Terry Moore putting Tambi into a different role. You're right. That's what I was thinking of. Yeah. Yeah, and we also have going on then, I guess we can open up for discussion too. We have this whole arc with Francine's being cheated on, right? Like Francine's getting this betrayal. She picks up her husband's, what she thinks is her husband's phone. He tells her it was some other doctor. She picks it up and answers it, and there's a woman on the other end. And long story short, we find out that Brad's been cheating on Francine. And I think this kind of harkens back to what Gore talked about earlier, when they eventually go to Griffin Silver's place after he's been murdered, and she sees the painting and finds out that she was a muse, and just everything that comes from that. That's when Francine decides, I'm done with Brad. It isn't when she first finds out that he was cheating on her. It was the seeing the painting, coming to this realization of what Nikki tells her. All of that leads into that decision. Yeah. Any thoughts on that part, Gore?
Yes, certainly. Francine has definitely changed. I mean, when she was first cheated on, she has a complete breakdown. Here by Freddie, but now she understands it. Look how the way he draws her. She's reasonable about this, and this I found interesting what she told her husband. She says, let's see, she says something about I don't hate you. Oh, she goes this. I don't think you're a monster, honey. She goes, I don't think you're a monster, honey. And I didn't expect you to be a saint either. You're a good man. I know you try hard to do the right thing. And I know you would never want to hurt me. And he says something that this is crazy. Why are you throwing this away? And she goes, that's the whole point. You knew what you were doing, and you did it anyway. You risked everything. We had to be with her, and you knew that. You took that risk because you didn't think, I'll take this one, which is to leave him. And it's not even the sex. It's the fact that you were willing to risk losing me for it. And he's like pleading her. Look at her face. This is completely different when we first met her with Freddie. He's pleading with her. She goes, it's all words to me, babe. Your actions tell me who you are and what you really think. I'm no more important to you than a hot lover. I just cost more, and you expect me to do your laundry. You know, so it's just, and now she knows she's at peace, and she knows at this point she's determined. No matter what, I'm going to Kachu. No questions asked. I should have been with her a long time ago. I've had 2 failed marriages. I've lost a child, and Kachu has always been there. She's one for me, and I'm going to her. And regarding how moving this book is, there's been a lot of emotional parts for me reading this book, and it all began early on when Kachu, as a teenage girl, goes to Francine and tells her. Well, he doesn't tell her. She goes to her bedroom and she's all beaten up, and then we learn why she was all beaten up. And from that moment on, it's been emotionally a very. I think of all the comics. I mean, maybe Day Tripper's another one, and some moments of Love and Rockets, but certainly this one, because it's so long emotionally, it's been it's been wonderfully painful, and I recently rewatched the music to Cinema Paradiso. I watched Cinema Paradiso and I watched The Mission and Paris, Texas back to back, and Cinema Paradiso and The Mission have the music of Ennio Morricone, and I was watching the comments on one of his symphony pieces for The Mission, and someone commented there, no composer has ever made me cry as much as Ennio. And I never thought about that, and that's true. I mean, you just watch The Mission, you lose a pound. You watch Paradiso, you lose 2 pounds. You watch them together, you're going to need an IV. And but it's true. And for a moment, I thought, what if Ennio Morricone soundtrack to this book?
Oh, yeah.
So if we're already in tears in parts of it, imagine if the music was there. So.
Your reading for that, Gore, was perfect, because that, for me anyways, that's exactly the calm that I picture Francine stating it in, and it just demonstrates her maturity. The difference, like you pointed out, from when she first got cheated on by Freddie and where she is now. There's that maturity, there's that calm, there's the calm sense of, I've got this wisdom now. Yep. This is what my heart's telling me to do. And it also makes me think a little bit to this comedy scene of, just, when Freddie cheats on her and then she goes to the park and she takes off all her clothes. And later on, Kachu doesn't believe her, and they're looking at the house, and she starts stripping down right there in the Arizona desert. Come on, we're going to do this thing. And we get that same kind of like book ending, which I thought was fabulous. But
it was a fabulous ending, yes. Yeah. And regarding that place too, that place that they finally go is the exact deposit, the exact amount for the deposit is how much Kachu has, coincidence. But also the place is Santa Fe. And David wants his ashes, wants Kachu to spread his ashes where she thinks it's fitting. And Santa Fe, saint and faith, true faith, so to speak. So, and I said, it's perfect. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be thrown in our face by more pointing it out. Look, see the connections. You see it.
Yeah.
And it makes, and then you have that coincidence, or is it biblical? Is it I don't know, higher power? This is the right deposit, the exact amount that they need. And it's wonderful.
Yeah. For the Love Comics, some thoughts on this part here we're talking about.
I mean, not specifically. It's just like I do wonder if this is the most emotionally turbulent comic I've read, but I think that's hard to judge because short stories have their impact, and then shorter works are modulated differently. But it is one which has made me rethink my opinion on its characters over and over again in a way that I can't think of many other comic series. Even stuff that I really, really enjoy. And I can run the gamut over there. It's like once you're into Hellboy, you're not going to really revise your opinion on Hellboy or Miyamoto Usagi. You're not really going to revise your opinion on what you think of them. You'll get more about them, but they'll tend to reinforce or support an opinion that you've already made and say, this is why I love Superman, or something like that. Whereas over here, the irritation and empathy that I felt for these characters, it was a roller coaster, and it was constantly being enriched and constantly being added to. And I think as I was saying, that these whole time travel tricks and all of these things, they're not just tricks, they're so potent as far as the storytelling is concerned, where you'll see Francine with a daughter, and then you'll see her get pregnant.
Yeah.
And then you see her have a miscarriage, and you're like really confused as to what's going on. It's so well done. It's so clever. It's so saying that, I'll give you things and you'll understand that there's been a separation by me giving you a reconciliation. I mean, that's extremely difficult to do. Like, you haven't shown me them getting separated. You haven't shown me like the chronology of the story presentation, not the chronology of the characters' lives, but the way that we are taken forward in time and taken backward in time, and how that plays with our emotions and our expectations. I'm hard pressed to think of anything else that has, worked as effectively over as many dozens and dozens of pages, hundreds of pages, as this series has. So yeah, that's sort of my flabbergasted wonder of a reaction to this.
Yeah. G, how about you? Some comments here?
So just try to keep my head straight about the whole kind of section, but it's the bit when, you said Francine finds out she's been cheated on. So like, for me, first of all, like, I had a random thought at that point, that what if the person cheating was actually, I forget what her husband's name is, but Griffin's wife.
Brad. Oh, Nikki.
Because knowing what comes next with Griffin, maybe there'd be some other spin story of espionage going on, So like, my brain was like immediately going like, is there something else kind of going on here? Is there going to be some connection? Because we don't really learn who this girl is, short of like a name that she says on the phone.
And yet she plays in a really important role. I don't mean to jump in, but she plays a really important role of pointing Francine to who she really is at the end there, right? And to what she means. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but she plays an important role as a small character.
Yeah, so it'd been interesting to maybe have expanded that moment a little bit more, or got something. But for me, that's the point when you can almost tell, Francine's completely got a focus on what she wants to kind of do, because partly that focus and partly the fact that the book becomes a lot more sort of prose towards the end. It starts feeling like you're almost like steamrolling to the end of the story at that point. We get less time at the end of the story than we got in some of the flashbacks, like, if that makes sense, or flash forwards, should I say. So it's interesting. And also, I think some of you guys kind of touched on, but like, as you're going through this story and as characters are showing all different sides of their personality, you also kind of change whose side you're on at different points of kind of time. So at the point in time that Francine's, getting her head around to be like, right, I want kind of Kachu back, I'm fully on Casey's side. I'm like, she's messed with Kachu enough times. Kachu seems happy right now. Leave her alone. Like, all you're gonna do is blow things up more, kind of thing. Yes, you should be her friend and you should keep in touch. But like, outside of that, like, actually things are pretty decent, apart from what's happening with David. Things are pretty decent, at that point in time. And I was left a little bit kind of disappointed for Casey at the end, because I felt that she connected with Kachu over David, and they were going to bring up David's child no matter what, kind of thing. And although Kachu and Francine get their happy ever after, Casey's now left out of that connection with David's child in a way, because she can only really be an aunt now. She's not going to get to live there. So it's interesting how you're, I say, how you connect with different characters at different kind of points in time, even like between a first read to a second read. Because like you, Blackpool, I felt that I was very much 100% focused on Kachu and Francine's kind of thing the first time round. And looking at it from the other kind of characters' perspectives a little bit more this time round, and I've been like, well, okay, so what would have been David's ideal, scenario? Would he have ended up with Kachu? Is that his ideal, or would he been better with Casey? And then like looking at it from like Kachu's perspective, would she have been better with David and Casey, or would she be better with Francine? Depending on what kind of would have balanced out better for her being an artist and not being kind of bounced around and so on and so forth. I know there are expanded kind of stories beyond this, but they're more like mixes in the overall Terrymore universe than like wholly focused on like this is what happened directly after Strangers in Paradise. But yeah, as I said, it's a journey. It's a bit of a mess with your head as you're kind of going through things, trying to remember what order all kind of different things happened in, and whether or not things actually happened in some cases, because we're even led to believe like halfway through the story that this is written by her daughter, but then towards the end of the story, you could choose like, I'm gonna write this story, so we don't really know by the end who actually wrote the story.
Yeah, and I'm gonna come over to Gore in a second here, but I just want to, Gore, if we play off of these biblical themes that we've got Casey and Kachu both agreeing that the world cannot live without an heir for David, right? Tambi was trying to get an heir, and it's almost like this resurrection type feeling to me now. I didn't think of it this way until we have this discussion, and you're pointing out some of the biblical stuff, but it was like just the goodness of David in the world, and Kachu and Casey could not live without that. And so they have this, well, Casey can't have a kid, so Kachu, you're going to have to basically go at it like cats. And there's some great scenes in there where Kachu is just taking David left and right, and he needs fluids and all the other good stuff to keep going sexually. I those scenes were so much fun. But there's the idea of like, maybe that's part of like this biblical theme of like this resurrection of having the kids. So I didn't really thought about it in those terms until we started having this conversation.
I think they do actually say in part of that conversation, like one of them says, "Oh yeah, we've got to help David to continue." That just sounds like religious or something. Like they do say something like that in like a passive way at one point.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Well, you see, the thing is, in Dr. Zhivago, in the novel Dr. Zhivago, and it's not really made clear in the films or the miniseries, Zhivago is a medical doctor. And through the influence of his uncle, who was once an Orthodox priest, but is no longer a priest, the way they see Christianity is more from a secular point of view, is the fact that immortality is done by how we conduct ourselves in this life, like Christ did, and that affects others. They see that as an example, and that is the secular view of immortality. Is that person will continue the influence they've done on you. Now, years will pass, decades will pass, centuries will pass, but you'll never know who started all this. Yeah. But it's basically, we influence each other, and we've forgotten where this domino first fell. And by these actions, we all know people in our lives. There's not as many as we would like, but who are basically like Christ figures, who no matter how difficult their life is, they never became embittered. Yeah. And they always were kind towards others and themselves. They weren't perfect, but they were kind. And in Zhivago, that's the case with him throughout the novel. And Laura, who is life for him, in a way inspires him in ways, and he sees goodness in Laura, in Laura. And if you don't mind, I'll read the end of this, and it's because it also makes you think as to who wrote this book, this story. It makes you think at the end, this is Kachu's story. She says, touching on what Highland G says, there's a golden thread connecting everything we do. It strings the days together, and it's easily seen when we look back and where we've been. I always thought the thread was purpose, a self-defining core, but I was wrong. When I look back now, all I see is love Francine, Tamby, Casey, David.
Mm.
Their love carried me through a life of pain that if not for them, I would have consumed me. If not for them, I would be lying in Darcy's grave. I would be scattered across Veronica's field. I would be the ashes in Lindsay's hotel room. There's only one reason I'm still here. I'm here because I am loved. David would want our child to know what I will tell her. I'll write down the whole story, the good and the bad, Francie's life and mine, two fragile threads weaving one that could not be broken. My daughter would know her father was a good man. She will know what he went through to be with me and how important God was to him. Francie's children will know what a blessing they are to their mother's life and why. So that's what I'm going to do. Write it down, all of it. It may take a while. It's a long story, but I have time. I have all the time in the world. I think I'll start with that night at the high school play. The night I first saw Francine for what she really was. A little girl lost in a beautiful woman. A stranger in paradise.
Mm.
Yeah, it's very touching.
Yeah. Well done, Gore. That's yeah, it's almost a sense of there's this idea in one of the African countries about, I think it's Mbutu, or like I'm me because you're you. Like the only way that I know who I am and the only way I'm a human being is because you're a human being, and together we reflect who we are. And I get a lot of that sense throughout this story. Thanks, Sean.
I found that reference, by the way. It says it's Kachu's talking with Casey about getting pregnant, and it says, I mean, it won't be an immaculate birth. Well, I don't know. The son of David, that sounds biblical. Weird.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
Good,
right.
good pull. Good pull. D.
Excellent.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean. You're up.
I just had a question for those of you who have read it more than once now, because I obviously have this one thing, and there were times when I stopped and I had to go back in order to, see if what I was thinking and remembering was correct, and where was this thing that had happened and characters, etc. How is it on a reread, whether it's a second time or even more than a second time? Like, does it have a sense of inevitability, or do you remember what's going to come up while you're reading it? What's that reaction or that surprise like? How is it different? Because I'm guessing it has to be different, but again, it's also more than 2,000 pages, so there's no way that one will remember every single detail and things like that. But you know how things are when you encounter them again, even if you've forgotten them, 1 microsecond after encountering it you remember it, etc. I was just curious as to the experience of the three of, I think all three of you are rereading it. That's the case, right? I think maybe I was the only one reading it for the first time, so I was just wondering about that experience and how that was for you individually. I mean,
G, you want to reply?
So yeah, for me, partly what I said earlier with kind of Blackpool was my first read was very, I felt kind of like deer in headlights focused on the main kind of Kachu and Francine kind of relationship. So I didn't pay as much attention to sort of side things. On the reread, I mean, like I feel like it was obvious, but maybe not, from the kind of offset that this was going to be a sort of like Ross and Rachel story that will eventually end up together. It just depends on how they're going to get there. And for me, it was never really about whether or not they were going to get there. It was about the journey and all the things that happen along the way. On this reread, I knew certain things kind of going in. It's been quite a while since I read it the first time round. I mean, as I said, I pretty much read everything else time or since. But yeah, I probably only remembered the overall plot up until roughly when the sort of Parker girls gets taken to bits, and then everything after that was a bit blurry. I certainly didn't remember how David eventually passed away, and I didn't remember that Casey was a Parker girl, and and a few things like that. I'd forgotten where Tammy got her scars from. Like little things still had emotional impact because it'd been such a period since I'd read them. But also, I think I gave more focus to them because I knew the mainline story, if that makes sense.
Yeah. How about you, Gore? What was your experience like this time through?
The second time, it was more enriching because the first time, I found it so compelling. You're just
lost in the story.
You're just moving pretty fast. It's like one of these streaming services. You start watching a show, you just start forwarding towards the part that you think are not significant, but and you just want to continue with it because you're so engrossed with it. And the second reading, this is like doing a happy ending. I think is very difficult in the sense of a convincing happy ending, right? And this is like Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, who writes, a wonderful happy ending to some of her books. And Pride and Prejudice is a perfect example. You have all these conflicts that occur, and you're thinking, how is it credible? How is it going to work? And it's a very satisfying conclusion. And so, as I was rereading this and taking my time with it, though, going very slowly, I was not intentionally, but I was looking, is there anything here that doesn't exactly work to lead to the end? Anything that seems just too contrived? And I didn't see that at all. And I began to see things I hadn't seen and the way I interpreted it. And so it was even more satisfying the second time. But I like to reread things, comics that I really like and books that I really like. And every time on a reread, since you're much more patient, and you start thinking of the connections, you're thinking, wait a minute. So when I would read something, I would jump ahead and go, wait a minute. Then I would remember something. This is actually important. And I would go, oh my God, there is a connection here. And so, yes, it was, as much as I liked it the first time, I liked it even more the second time.
Yeah. And I'll mention, from my standpoint, I think when I think back before the reread, it was like, I remember, the bits in the beginning, obviously, with Freddie and Francine. I remember the plane crash because that was such an epic part. Like, I remember just being such shock when the plane crash happened. And I remember very little after that besides the forward sequence where Kachu and Francine are older and they've got a daughter who was writing the manuscript and going to New York at the publisher. But a lot of the second half stuff, I don't remember. And I had stuff out of order. Like Freddie with that picture of like, those are the biggest boobs I've ever seen. I thought that came way earlier in the story is how I remembered it. So it was almost like reading new to a certain extent, which was great. And I think now when I do read it through again, this will be something I hopefully, depending on how long I live, just every once in a while, I'm going to come back through the series. Is like looking at some of these, because of this discussion, thinking about some of these, like the biblical things, like, is there some more underlying threads that I've missed? And that's the beauty of all these rereads, especially with a series that's this long, that has this kind of character development. I was talking to a friend last night about old Star Trek versus new Star Trek, and how like in 10 episodes now with new Star Trek, how do you have a character development? How do you have character development in 10 episodes where 26 episodes in the season, and having 5 or 6 seasons, 7 seasons for Next Generation, 170 episodes, you can really develop characters. 100 plus episodes or 100 plus issues, like with Terry Moore, you can develop these characters. You can show all these multiple sides. And so I think there's still just a lot to unpack. And I think just our life experience, as I become hopefully a little wiser in my life, a little more caring, a little more open-hearted, hopefully things resonate even a little bit deeper, on a deeper level with me going through it again and again.
I think, Gore, you made a point that I've never thought of, but it sounds so wonderful now. When I was reading through it, as I said, I kept going back to check on things and to corroborate and to remind myself. But on a second or third read, one can skip forward in the same way. And I never thought of that, and I'm like, I've got to start reading things differently, because now it's not that you can't do that the first time you're reading it because you need that chronology. But if you've kind of absorbed it at the beginning, I've never thought about that as a possibility, but thanks for putting that into my head.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a bulk of the story, but I do want to just offer up some space if anybody's got anything that we didn't cover that they really wanted to discuss. Is there any sections we missed or anything that you caught that you might want to think about or might want to talk about? No? Okay. I would love to hear kind of final thoughts, like on where you're at. And I don't know, I think, Shwam, since it's your first time reading, do you want to go first? Do you want to go last?
Yeah, well, I mean, in some ways, I think all through this episode of ours, I've been talking about my final thoughts because it's been very conclusive, and I really think that the last third of this ended up being more potent than I thought it would be. But I think I might have just worried that a thing like this can't really end, and it's going to sort of just be one of those things where like, and then it'll just keep going, and maybe we'll come back to it in some years' time or something like that. But the fact that it took these conclusive steps as far as the story is concerned, I found that to be quite impressive. Again, I've been very impressed with this. I do, as we were talking earlier, I do think that there are areas, probably as Highland G pointed out, because it's Terry Moore's first work and long work, etc. There are areas in which I would have preferred it to be in comics than in prose. But other than that, I can't really think of, because it's so singularly itself and it's so uniquely what it is, and it's so accomplished and it's so well rounded and it's so well considered and it's so wonderfully crafted that irrespective of whether it speaks to you individually as an appealing story, I think that's almost secondary in the way that, again, some great literature is, where you just have to sort of give props to the achievement in almost a separate way than thinking about, did I like the story, did I like the characters, etc., all of which I did. But I think I'm really overwhelmed by how magnificent an accomplishment in comic storytelling it is, which and I know that there is a revival, and Highland G, you mentioned it, there's something 25 years later.
There's a couple of continuation books. There's Adventures in Paradise 25, which is
25.
I think it's supposed to be like when the kids are toddlers kind of thing. And there's also Parker Girls, which is a separate book as well.
Right. So I can think of the Parker Girls as being a sort of spin-off, maybe, unless it's
it's not an origin story. It's like a continuation, but kind of what Tambi gets up to.
Right. So I can understand that, but the Strangers in Paradise 25 being a continuation of the story, it's something I am simultaneously very excited and very nervous to hear about. Because
it's not really like a pickup right after the end of this and the story's going to keep going thing. It's more like let's check in 10 years and just see that everything is actually happy ever after. There's obviously human elements in life.
But so it's almost like, how when you hear like a TV show that you really enjoyed is being revived, there's a trepidation where you're just like, I mean, is it even necessary? I mean, if it was something that was really unfairly before its time killed off, and it happens within a certain period of time, allowing the creator to finish the story, that's one thing. But 25 years down the line or something like that. I think
it was also an anniversary for Terry Moore, because I think that 25-year one, if I remember correctly, crosses over with some characters from his other books to kind of create the universe in a way.
Right.
So like it's not a must read, but if you've read everything Terry Moore, it's a fun read because it's kind of pulling a lot of things together.
So I'm not yet decided on whether I want to read that or not, but given how good this was and how much I enjoyed the skill on display every single page, whether or not the story was clicking for me. As I said, there were times when it kind of lost me and then it brought me back into it, which was again part of what was so impressive about it. But it does feel like Terry Moore's earned my respect in the way that I'll give it a shot, probably. I might be disappointed, but I'm still, he's earned it as far as I'm concerned with this book.
And whether you want to read it or not, when Highland G or I picks it to discuss on the Comic Jam, you don't have a choice. We'll just make sure it's one of these books that one of us picks at some point. So it's out of your control at this point, right? Yeah.
I would say that
then I'll be like, well, I just had to do it. It wasn't. I'll be able to get myself off the hook in case I don't like it.
I mean, the other two books that I would recommend and probably are his most popular ones and are likely the main ones that tie into this kind of story would be Rachel Rising, which is more of a I mean, I didn't realize until this discussion how much religion references is in this book, but it's a heavier focused religion story, like a sort of like I forget what her name is. It's like the Adam's first wife or something, like something like that. I forget what what's. Do you know in religion?
Lilith, isn't it? Lilith.
Lilith, yeah. So it's like Lilith's like story, but again, it's all in Terry Moore's kind of like fashion. So it's not like a strict, we're telling some religious tale. It's got its own kind of weaves and stuff, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but Zoe's like my favorite character from that book. In fact, she's my favorite character from all of his books. And then the other one that's a much shorter book, and I would just personally highly recommend, is Motor Girl, which is like a story about PTSD sort of stuff, and it is just so well done for like a 5-issue story.
Yeah. Well, Highland G, you want any wrap up as far as your overall reading, your overall impression on the second reading?
Yeah, so I'm both surprised and not surprised in a way, where like I knew I was going to be reading a lot of prose, and I knew that was going to be something that I personally kind of struggle with. So like, that was a given. As far as like positives are concerned in that though, rather than kind of being like, okay, I'm kind of struggle back kind of through this, I've actually, as I say, picked up a lot of stuff about the side characters, other bits and pieces, and things that I didn't pick up. You guys have kind of picked up and mentioned, and it's always fun to kind of have discussions about books in that way anyway, because even if, let's just say, you and I read a book and I hated the book and you loved the book, having the discussion makes having read that book interesting, because now we've been able to flesh out different people's perspectives and what you might have taken from something in a good or bad way. But yeah, surprisingly, I thought I'd come out kind of fairly neutral, and I'd because it isn't my favorite read, was never my favorite read of his books, because it felt a little bit experimental compared to his other ones. But I think it probably does rank up a little bit higher than it did after a second read. So it's definitely grown on me a bit.
Good. Yeah. Gore?
I wish this book had been available, in its entirety when I was a teenager.
Oh, yeah.
Or in my early 20s. And because it's not that the book is didactic or anything like that, but you learn a lot from it. And you really do, about how to, like you said, how to live your life, right? And also how to look at others. And certainly if I had read this back then, I was already starting to read novels and I was reading comics, but as a comic, this would have been just absolutely very, very important to me. Very, let me phrase that. It would have been maybe, I guess, helpful in some ways. And at this point, I don't know anyone. All my friends' kids are all grown, but they don't read comics. But it would be something I would recommend to a young person, just if they wanted to, just take it all. It's just, here, take these books and see what you think. Because it would have been something. Again, going back to Cinema Paradiso, it's a film I saw when I was like, basically, I think it was 18 or 19 when I saw that film. And over the decades, I've seen it. And basically, when I first saw it, I was Toto, Salvatore. And then now I'm the older guy. I'm the older Salvatore, the older Toto. So I see the film in a much. I remember when I first saw it, and I began thinking, what's my future going to be like? And then when you see it, you know, there's a lot of parallels and stuff like that. And the same with something like this, with Strangers in Paradise, that I had read it when I was very young, and then read it over the years. I think it still would have resonated, very much so. And regarding For the Love of Comics, talked about, do I want to read what happens afterwards is, made me think of Modesty Blaze. Modesty Blaze, the comic strip, did have a conclusion where Modesty and Willie walk out into the sunset. But then Peter O'Donnell wrote a short story afterwards. And their fate is a little different. I mean, it basically takes place afterwards. And it's a very affecting story. And because you know the history of these characters, you know what they've been through, and how he decided to end it in prose was very, very moving. And I don't know what Terry has in mind for Francine and Kachu. Hopefully he'll just leave them at peace, and they'll fade into the sunset, you know. And that's the way they'll be with us, you know, when we go to sleep at night. So yeah,
that's sweet. Yeah, and I'll just a couple of brief comments. You know, the first time I read this through was actually with Highland G. We read this through, 2017, somewhere around there, 2018. And so it always held a special place. And then I'm just so grateful that For the Love of Comics, Highland G, you guys said when I talked about, like, I really want to reread it, but it's such a big undertaking. And then there was just this like support of like, well, why don't we do it together?
Yeah, let's just do it then.
Yeah. And it just, you know, there's like that sense of care that the characters have. I feel that, like, you guys were like, yeah, you want to read? Let's do it together. And then it holds a new special meaning. I've read a lot of omnibuses. I've got a lot of books on my shelves that I've read, and reading them alone is one thing, but coming together multiple times and sharing and learning from, oh, I took this out of it, I took that out of it, these themes, just it's something special when you read it with people, whether they like it or not. So I'm just really grateful to have read it with you guys, because like the first time reading it through just Highland G, this will be memorable. It's memorable in a way that when even reading, you know, something like Grant Morrison's Animal Man, which I love, it lacks some of the impact because I wasn't sharing it in this way. Sharing it with people that I respect, that I have a relationship with, it holds a little more weight. So I'm just grateful that you all are along the journey with me. And I know it's all one of your one or two favorite books of all times, your series of all times. There's no disputing that. But thank you guys for being along on the ride. It was great.
No, thank you for having us on.
Yes, thank you for the invitation.
And I'm glad I finally reread this, and I needed something to make me do it, and it's the right time for me to reread this book. That's all I'll say. And regarding books that are moving, I got up earlier, and I know you guys are probably familiar with this book. This is also a very moving book. You know, when I first read this, it's just like, oh my goodness. Powerful book, Three Shadows by Pedrosa. So what one book can do to you. And but I'm grateful to all of you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and it is your channel, Highland G. Do you want to take us out tonight?
For pizza.
I was like, where are we going? Man, that would be a hell of a trip to get everybody together. Yeah, okay. Well, we haven't really had very much comments, but hopefully there has been a few people watching. It's kind of been going, showing up to like 2 or 3 kind of while we were live. So thank you those who have watched while we're live, even if you were too shy to say anything in the comments. If you are watching afterwards, feel free to obviously comment below, and I'll kind of check in periodically, as the guys can do as well, and we can kind of take things from there. But yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you everybody for taking part. This is our final for now on Strangers in Paradise until we pick up with Stranger in Paradise 25.
We promise now. And I
But
also
I'll just-
I want to thank you, Highland G, for hosting this and putting these together. Not just these conversations, but all of these conversations that you regularly do. I look forward to them tremendously. They're a bright spot.
Well, thank you, because I only do them because I enjoy having you guys on. So I get as much out of it. It doesn't feel like a chore to me, put it that way. I look forward to kind of doing it. And as we said, kind of a little bit before the kind of chats, like you get that kind of priority in your head where like somebody else wants you to do something, and it's like, no, I'm going to this kind of live stream, and somebody might see it as being like oh, you're just going to go watch something on the internet. But no, these are my friends I'm having conversations with. I've got priorities.
Yeah.
So yeah. But thank you everybody for watching, and I'm going to just
Thank you.
end it there.
Great. Thanks, guys. Good to see you.